Thank you all for coming. My name is Matthew Fillenwarth. I'm the Assistant Chief. This is our prosecutor, Brad Cooper. Here to talk about the shooting and the homicide we had this morning. Approximately 12:30 this morning at 372 Bridal Court, our officers responded to reports of multiple people shot. Upon arrival, they found what we now know as the suspect, who has not yet been identified, was deceased in the street from a gunshot wound. There were two people, the victims, inside of the residence. Both of them were shot. The male was shot in the thigh, and the female was shot in the arm. They were both transported to Eskenazi Hospital, were treated, and are expected to be released today. Statements taken by the victims in this case indicate that this was a drug-related robbery. There were drugs located in the victim's residence. The victim stated that they were letting an acquaintance out of the door at approximately 12:30 this morning when the suspect, dressed all in black, wearing rubber gloves, a bandana over his face, and armed with a handgun, forced his way into the residence, started to fight with the male victim, identified as 21-year-old Ryan Endress, and his girlfriend was 21-year-old Kaylee Whitaker. Endress and the suspect started to fight. At some point, Endress was able to get away from the suspect, grab a handgun. Exchange of gunfire occurred between the suspect and the witness or victim. During this exchange of gunfire, both the victims were shot. The suspect suffered one fatal gunshot wound, ran out of the house towards what we believe to be a car that was waiting for him. Before he could get to the car, he collapsed in the street and died. The investigation is still ongoing. Right now, the suspect did not have any identification on him. An autopsy is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. And our detectives are still working actively, trying to piece the rest of this case together and to identify the deceased.
The men and women who survived the shooting, what type of charges could they potentially face related to the drugs found in the house?
Based on the drugs that were found inside the house and the amount of drugs that were found inside the house, they will most likely be charged with some form of dealing with possession of a controlled substance with the intent to deliver, and that would be the primary charges against them. The act of shooting by the male victim, who was the residence, that was his dwelling, him shooting the person that burglarized his house and robbed him at gunpoint gives him a standard Indiana self-defense claim, and he would be justified in using deadly force to ward off a burglary or ward off an armed robbery, especially when a gun is pointed at his head. Therefore, there will be no charges related to the shooting against the man or the woman.
Describe how much was found inside the house, cash, drugs, what was found?
We're still getting all that together, and that's still part of the charging decision that we have to get, but there were significant amounts of drugs found inside. There were significant amounts of drugs found inside the house, and there was a variety of drugs found inside the house. We found some marijuana, controlled substances, some acid. Haven't seen acid in a long time around here. And we're going to gather all that together, go through the code, find out what the weights are. We still have to get the lab results of those things to figure out what level we can make those charges.
Does it appear that there was a drug dealing operation happening in this house or out of this house?
Hard to say from the evidence where the actual dealing was taking place. A lot of times they will not deal out of their house. They will go elsewhere and deal. They'll have other people go deal for them. In this case, what we came upon was a burglary and an armed robbery that happened to be amongst drug dealers.
But this didn't seem to be a personal stash of drugs. You believe these drugs were being sold somewhere in the area? Based
on the amounts, yes.
So are we talking like you go in and it's all there, or hidden? No.
There was a lot of marijuana initially just in plain view when the officers went in. There was a handgun lying on the floor. There were bullet holes through the door.
There were smoking pipes all over the place.
Yeah. You could smell the raw marijuana from outside the house with the front door open when I was there.
And based on all the activity and the drugs in plain view, a search was done. Search warrant was acquired, and that search netted a lot of different types of drugs in different places in the house.
Did it seem to be, you know, packaged up in some way? Or, I mean, how was it being stored?
I would say that the primary drug that seems to be most present there was marijuana, and it's also the lowest end drug that we can prosecute. It's a B misdemeanor to possess marijuana. It's only an A misdemeanor now to deal large amounts of marijuana. However, it should be noted that and there was a decent amount of marijuana at this scene. The last, I think 3 or 4 of the last homicides that have taken place in Greenwood have been over marijuana drug deals. Justin Carter, Marcus Hardy, some of the shootings at the Red Roof Inn.
We had the double homicide, that was over $200 worth of marijuana.
Mhm. That was Justin Carter, yeah.
Okay, yes.
Yep.
I see the victims.
Did you guys have interactions with either Kaylee or the guy before?
No, our detectives didn't have any kind of tips or indication that that kind of activity was going on there.
Is there any description or anything on this vehicle that took off with the people in it?
No. There was a few witnesses, of course, in something like this. It was dark outside. All of a sudden, people hear a commotion. We got a very vague description of the car. Our detectives still are following up on that end to try to locate a car, if there was one, and who was in it.
So someone drove that car away. He didn't come by himself to this house.
We don't believe so.
What can you say about the timing of someone leaving at the same time this guy was approaching the door?
It's hard to say because those folks have not been identified either, so we don't know exactly what they were doing there or who they were with.
The person who was leaving was not there. He took off.
I believe they took
Yes.
off, and the person that potentially came with him is dead.
Yeah, right now, we don't know exactly how that played out. Yes, it's suspicious. Yes, it's something we'll look into. You know, it could be coincidence. However,
Could be.
you know, we have to determine that.
So someone came to the door first?
It's our understanding the victim, in this case, had this acquaintance that he did not know very long, had been over. He was showing the acquaintance out the front door when the suspect was waiting there with the mask and the gun and all
Barged
that,
his way
and
in.
forced his way into the house at gunpoint.
Assume you'd like to talk to this acquaintance.
Yeah, we'd like to talk
Yes.
to anybody that was involved in
Mhm.
this case. Absolutely.
We'd like to know who the dead guy is too, because
Yeah.
that might lead us back to the other ones.
Yeah.
For neighbors in the area who are concerned, like, you know, a lot of them say, I didn't know this stuff was going on around my neighborhood. What's your message to them?
That's
Yeah.
Fire away.
You know, that's a pretty quiet neighborhood, but drugs invade all parts of our society right now, everyone's lives. There's very few people you'll talk to in society that their lives have not been impacted in some way, typically negatively, by drugs in this country. Obviously, this doesn't happen every day in Greenwood, and that's pretty a quiet community we have down there. And some of the neighbors even came up to us last night and said, well, I noticed some traffic in and out of there, you know, young people. And so we constantly stressed, because the police department, the prosecutor's office, we can't be everywhere. We gotta rely on our community to keep it safe. And so someone made a comment last night, well, I didn't know who to call. Yes, you do, call the police.
Call the police.
Anytime something looks suspicious or out of ordinary in your neighborhood, we constantly beg people to call us. And we get well, I know you guys are busy, and we are, okay, but we're not so busy that we can't go check on this. We'd much rather stop something like this from happening. Now we're investigating a homicide and a home invasion robbery. So I can't stress that enough to the citizens of our city or any county or city. Call the police if something makes you suspicious, because you don't have to be necessarily a trained police officer to know what's suspicious in your neighborhood. You know what belongs in your neighborhood. You know who belongs in your neighborhood. And if it makes you think that's some weird activity or that makes me think maybe something's going on, give us a call. Let the police check it out. And a lot of times it's nothing, and sometimes it's that one tip that you'll never know what you stopped from happening by early police intervention in something, and we make an arrest for drugs, and then the homicide doesn't happen afterwards. We'll never know that, but
And these tips can be made anonymously, so you don't have to put yourself out there and put yourself in harm's way that you're calling out some drug dealers that may have a lot of guns and drugs in their house in your neighborhood. So you can make those anonymously, and then we can covertly go check it out.
What's the timeline on arrests and charges with these two?
Well, they both got shot, so we're going to probably have them charged here in the next couple of days.
What's the message we hear a lot, it seems to apply in this case, the connection between drug activity and crime and violent crime leading one to another?
A lot of it is follow the money. And in most of the homicides and shootings that we have had, it's been over marijuana and the proceeds of marijuana. Your typical meth dealer does not make a lot of money in Johnson County. Your typical heroin dealer does not make a lot of money in Johnson County. We're talking personal use buys that are coming in. Most of them are just dealing stuff to be able to support their own habits when it comes to methamphetamine and when it comes to heroin and opiates. But marijuana is becoming really big business. A lot of people are pooling large amounts of cash together and sending somebody out to Colorado or elsewhere where it would be legal, and they're collecting as much marijuana as they can get and driving it back and spreading it out amongst several of them. We've had several searches and seizures in the past month where we found $25,000 that was a marijuana pool in Franklin, $30,000 that was a marijuana pool out in the county. So when you start talking about that kind of money, you're going to start bringing these people in that are going to want to rob you or think that they got shafted and want to get their money back, or they just want the drugs because they like to smoke it. But when it gets to this sort of a state, this sort of thing's going to happen.
Is there a lot of cash in that house?
I don't know. Was there?
It was less than $4,000, I think, just shy of is what we recovered, I think, from the safe.
How many guns, handguns were in the house?
No mercy.
I don't know. There were numerous firearms in the house, and there were numerous firearms used in the shootout that took place. So, and when you go back to, people think marijuana, today's marijuana is so much more expensive and potent than the marijuana 15 years ago.
Absolutely.
And so when you think, well, they're just being shot, you know, an ounce of marijuana is not cheap, you know, especially when they're bringing this high potency stuff in from places like Colorado. So when people think, well, you know, you're thinking from the 80s or the 90s, the marijuana today is completely different. The potency is 10 times what it used to be.
And just look at this scene. I mean, you have a masked, gloved gunman waiting at presumably a marijuana dealer's front door, waiting for that door to come open. When it does come open, he brings his firearm in and robs him. And what does the marijuana dealer have in about every room in his house? Everywhere you see, there's a handgun. Because they all know it's a dangerous business. You have to believe that they suspected that something like this could happen because of all the guns that were in readily available places that were just found all throughout the house. So just by the fact that the marijuana dealers and the marijuana robbers are all carrying firearms shows that they know it's an inherently dangerous business.
And a lot of these dealers, too, they're more concerned about getting ripped off than they are the police, the SWAT team coming in. They know that's going to happen. And that part of it's not anything new. When I work narcotics, you get these dealers, they are so concerned because the police don't come in and torture you until you tell them where your money stash is or your dope stash is. The other suspects that want to come in and rob you, once they get you in your house and they haven't drawn attention to it, and I've seen people in my career that were literally tortured until they gave up their drugs. And so on that end of it, they've got a lot to worry about, you know, not just the police coming in and breaking down their door.
And one of the cases we were talking about earlier on, over $200 worth of marijuana, there was an older couple that was both dealing marijuana out of their house to supplement their Social Security. They were having it FedExed in from Colorado. And this guy, Justin Carter, got wind of it, came over to rob them. They wouldn't give up the marijuana. He shot them both. So we have a $200 marijuana amount, and 2 people are dead over it.
Given the new dynamic, how do you curb the problem?
A lot of ways to curb the problem, and it's not a simple solution. It's going to be really hard to curb the problem when it's available as readily as it is and legalized in other states. The best thing we can do here is aggressively go out and try to ferret those people out and arrest them. Unfortunately, we don't have a whole heck of a lot we can do with them after we arrest them. It's like Matt was saying, a B misdemeanor is maximum of 180 days in jail. And I defy anyone to find anyone in our prison who's honestly sitting in our prison based on possession of marijuana. So we can arrest them. We can sometimes take their money, take their stuff, take their guns, take whatever their proceeds are, and that might hurt them for a little bit. But there really is not sufficient legal remedies from a prosecutor's standpoint to do much to the dealers and the users that we catch, especially when it comes to marijuana.
But also, when you're talking the drug problem as a whole, we're not going to solve that on a local basis.
Nope.
The drug problem in this country is huge. Social, economical, you name it. I mean, it's not a simple answer. As everyone knows, our country's been having a war on drugs since the 80s, the 70s. We're still having that war on drugs, and it's not getting any better.
So is the fact that some states have legalized marijuana, is that compounded the problem of marijuana here because they'll go buy it legally there and bring it back here?
Absolutely, yes.
The thing is, you don't, as the prosecutor said, we get a lot of marijuana in the state from Colorado. You know, it's high potency, what we used to call commercial grade marijuana that gets put in bales and bundles from Mexico and shipped up. Nobody wants to buy it. So this stuff is in direct competition with the cartels in Mexico and South America as far as the marijuana trade goes. And the consumers here in the United States want the high potency marijuana. And so all these indoor operations where you have, you know, professionals raising the level of the THC in the plants and marketing that out, whether it's in edible goods, you know, I mean, marijuana comes in all these different forms now. It's all very potent. And the stuff that's coming from within the United States is being sold at a huge price.
Mm-hmm. And
the demand for the stuff, at least the marijuana from Mexico, you hardly ever see that stuff on the street anymore. It's all this high potency marijuana.
at least for now, Colorado's, I think, the closest state that has recreational marijuana use.
I think so.
That's still a good 1,000 miles away. So these people are going to get together, find someone who's going to go out there. They're going to pool their money. So now you're not talking a couple $1,000s, a couple $100s. You're talking tens of thousands of dollars driving out to Colorado with tens of thousands of dollars of marijuana driving back. And when you start getting that kind of money involved, I mean, that's how the mafia started in the drug business. They started dealing the mass quantities of it, shipping it in, bringing it in large quantities, and then distributing it. And that's really what's going on right now with the marijuana.
So would you say what happened in this home, in this neighborhood in Greenwood, is a microcosm of the legalization of pot in Colorado?
I don't know about microcosm of it, but it's certainly been a contributing factor to a lot of these cases.
You know, if they have to ship it in across the border, they've got customs and everything that they've got. When it's being manufactured right here in the United States, there's a lot less stopping that from going state to state.